Welcome to Mignano, Monte Lungo. My name is Gianni Blasi and I am welcoming you to Italy. I am standing where the veterans stood many times during their tours back to Mignano. This is the starting place. This is where it all began, at least in the Italian campaign for the force. And we will get to the details in just a minute. In the meantime, we can take a look at the place where there was the baptism of fire. So here we are below La Defensa. If you look behind me, you'll see the cornerstone of this incredible mass with Mount Camino on its left at 963 meters, La Defensa at 960, and behind La Defensa as a cornerstone you will see the peak of La Remetania. That was the main objective of the force. But when did the force get here and why did it get here? It got here because the 3rd Division had not managed to take this position. So, finally, the 1st Special Service Force had a job. And this was a hell of a job. Captain Ed Thomas came down here with 2 of his men from the 1st Company, 2nd Regiment, because Colonel Frederick had ordered them to come down and inspect the situation and see what it was like. They needed information. So they came down at around the end of November, after the 3rd Division had ceased its attacks on this mountain, and they managed to filter in to this area. There was nothing left. This place was totally rubble. There is a castle beside me which has been totally renovated now, but back then there was nothing. There was nothing left. There was not a house left standing. So Ed Thomas and 2 men, Fenton and Van Osdale, came with him from Santa Maria di Capovetere, and they managed to take a good look at what the situation was. Now, I remember Ed telling me right in this position as we were looking up at the mountain, he said, those 2 guys could read terrain like you read a book. They could look at that mountain and tell you exactly what kind of soil we would find, what kind of rocks, what kind of vegetation. That's why they were here. So they came, took a look around in a very secluded way. One might wonder, how is it that they didn't take any fire? Of course, they were not exposing themselves. And the Germans knew that the 3rd Division had eased off. Once they had inspected the area and had come to the conclusions of which way was best to climb that mountain and which approach they should take, they had an incredible vision. It's not on any book. Ed noticed that there were 2 sailors, American sailors, walking around in the rubble. Immediately they called them, they told them to get down. They were walking around in their Cracker Jacks. And they asked them, what are you guys doing here? And they said, well, we came to see the front. So immediately they were instructed to get the hell out, because some machine gun fire would have left them on the ground. So once they had established what the situation was, the 3 men from the force went back to Colonel Frederick and filed in a full report. Now, if we consider the American sector, which was attempted by the 3rd Division, somebody actually did get to the top because dog tags had been found up there, but they never took it in in any way. So the problem was, how do we get here and what do we do? They had to take the trucks from Santa Maria di Capovetere, come down, and 16 kilometers from this place they had to walk in the countryside, and very often in the bed of a creek with vegetation over it so that they would not be detected. Now, the whole wall had machine gun emplacements halfway up, all lined up all the way across, and of course there were machine gun emplacements further up. There was observation with their incredible Zeiss optics, so everything was very clearly observed. When the force finally made it to below the mountain in the creek bed of the little river called La Peccia, it was getting dark on the 2nd of December. And the 3 regiments were located in 3 different positions. 1st and 3rd down below, 2nd regiment, I would say a good third of the way up. We do not see much vegetation there now, but in those days there was a lot more vegetation because they used to make charcoal here. So they were able to go up at least, some say half. I have found traces 1/3 of the way up, and they stayed there for 24 hours, resting and going through their plans of attack. Now, where would the attack be? The attack would be in the 2nd gully, starting from the right. You have the 1st gully, and then the 2nd gully. They would go up the 2nd gully to where you get the first sheer cliffs. Then they would swing around right on the north side and keep going to the sheer cliffs that you see further up and attack them there where the Germans did not expect some kind of strong attack or resistance. In the meantime, the 1st regiment would be lined along the crest of the lower part of the mountain. It's what the veterans call the dogleg, and there is a hydro pole there now. That is elevation 368 meters above sea level, and they were all lined up all the way down, ready to attack when the order was given. While 2nd Regiment was making the attack up on top, 3rd Regiment was bringing up ammunition and water, and when possible they would bring down the wounded. To get a proper idea of the 2nd Gully, look at where you see those gray sort of stripes of stone. In there, that's the 2nd Gully. And when they reached the gray part during the attack, they swung right. That is, they went north. Now, in a situation like this, where this was called the $1 Million Mountain because of all the bombs that were thrown at it, because of all the artillery going on, it was never hit by aircraft. The Germans were not stupid. They were deeply entrenched. They had an escape route on the back, and when artillery lifted its fire, they knew that they were practically combing the lower part, softening up the hillside, and when the artillery stopped, they were expecting soldiers. They were expecting the infantry. But they were strongly expecting the infantry on this side because they thought that the other side was too steep for an attack. That was the winning card of the 1st Special Service Force, taking those cliffs. That's where all those months in Montana paid off. It's incredible how much stuff was left behind, and when I had the possibility, I often asked the veterans, what was the top of La Defensa like after the battle, after the 7th? And all they could say was, it was a mess. A true mess. And this is what's left of that mess. So we are entering the Historicus Museum dedicated to the force. And we could spend a whole day in here, but I'm going to concentrate on 3 main things. Well, this is an original piece donated by a veteran of the force to the museum. Olive drab outside and white for the snow inside. Very rare to find the fur on it after all these years. But this is an attempt to recreate what the inside of a house would have been like, what some kind of post would have been like. And there are so many relics and so many specific things that we could go on for hours and hours, but I want to take you into the other room for 2 reasons.
Azione.
Well, this is a donation to the museum by Sergeant Sam McGee. Sam was here several times, and we even had a big argument once because he wanted to climb the mountain, and it was stormy weather, and I had to convince him to come to my house. But Sam was very hard-headed at times, if not always. In any case, this is a donation he made to the museum. His sleeping bag, not the helmet, his sleeping bag, his pack sack, which he used many times, and it's been used for several reenactments and films. You might be wondering why I came here, and this particular corner is the cause of many of the force casualties. These 2 are 2 MG-42 machine guns, which were capable of shooting 1,200 rounds, in theory, to the minute. These carried the bullets for the MGs. These are the barrel of the MGs, which would overheat. And so that's why we find so many of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because they would overheat and they would have to change them. The device which allowed that very high speed of fire is this device here, which allowed this machine gun to shoot 1,200 rounds to the minute. Below, we do have some deadly weapons. These are all barrels from Mauser K98s, that's Mauser K98, and which was the typical rifle of the German soldiers, and the other deadly weapon, which was easy to use and very fast to load and reload, was the Schmeisser machine pistol. So when we think of the 500 casualties in this area on the attack on Mount La Defensa, these were the weapons that created all those casualties. We're actually looking at the so-called dog leg, this lower part of Mount La Defensa. That's the cornerstone of Mount La Defensa, and this lower part, called the dogleg, actually had the 1st Regiment men behind it. At the highest, it is 368 meters, and they were on this side so that they were covered from the fire of Mount Lungo, where we'll be going to next, and Mount Maggiore, which is right in front of it, while the 2nd Regiment had attacked the cliffs that you see further up, and the 3rd Regiment was bringing up material, ammunition, food, water. The 1st Regiment was here waiting to receive the order to attack and to support the fighting going on up above. Well, some smart officer of the 3rd Division came up and, being high in rank, ordered these men to go into the open and to attack the northern side. The problem was that second they got on that side, they were totally exposed to the crossfire from Mount Lungo and from Mount Maggiore, and it was a slaughter. They had to smoke the area down. Casualties were extremely high in the 1st Regiment, and it was a problem pulling the wounded men out because they couldn't go out to get them. So this rim here is where the 1st Regiment was before it was dragged into that unhappy battle. You might be wondering why we are up here and where are we? Well, we are in the German positions on Mount Lungo. There were Germans on this mountain, which is approximately 300 meters above sea level, and it is 4 kilometers long. It was really loaded with emplacements, machine guns, mortar pits, and all kinds of goodies. Why were they here? Because they are right in the middle of the Mignano Gap. If you look from one side over to my left, there is a road, and there's actually a cemetery there as well, but that's the lower part, and if you measure it coming across to where it crosses the railway for the trains, and you keep going to the base of Mount La Defensa, right on the corner, well, you have approximately a kilometer, almost half a mile. And there is only one road. The Germans had broken all the ties on the railway, so the Allies could not use the railway, or they would have to reconstruct the railway. The road was practically a 2-lane, they call it Highway 6, it was a two-lane road. So they have total observation from here right in the middle, and from La Defensa, which is on our right, 960. They have observation from La Rimetania, which is behind this tree. And then they have observation over on the mountains to my left, all the way to Mount Sammucro, which is that pointed one. And if you look behind Mount Sammucro to the left, you will find Mount Maio, further back. So this is essentially the winter line. So as we were saying, these high positions all had incredible observation for the upcoming attacks by the Allies. And on the side which we cannot see now, of La Defensa and Mount Camino, there were attacks by 3rd Division infantry and by British units. Now, on the 3rd of December, the force, with its second regiment, decided to leave the 1st regiment on the dogleg behind the crest where it was covered, and they went up and around the cliffs and up the cliffs. This is on the night of the 3rd. They managed to get up there by 5 o'clock in the morning, and the Germans were caught by total surprise. Now, Frederick had his command post at the base of those gray cliffs, in a little cave. Now, from the 3rd to the 6th, they had to fight. This is the northern end. They had to fight to control the southern and western end, which was very difficult because they were totally under constant fire, and the Germans knew this place like the back of their hand. So it took them 3 days to go to the base of that mountain, which is called La Rimetanea. Right now, if we were to walk it up on top, it would take maybe an hour and a half, 3 days. On the 7th, the Brits finally managed to come up the eastern side, beside the area given to the force, and by the afternoon of the 7th, the force had pushed off the Germans from that last hump, which is La Rimetanea. Now, one last thing I would like to point out is the dogleg. Consider that we are behind the dogleg with the 1st Regiment, and the big mistake by Colonel Wilbur is to order those men to go out and fight and try to take the mountain. Imagine how the Germans are still laughing, because the second they came out, they had them all pinned with their machine gun fire from this side of the mountain. On this side there are loads of machine gun positions. Remember, 1,200 rounds to the minute, and mortar pits from up on top and further back. Plus, they were taking fire from this mountain here, Mount Maggiore, which sticks out. You don't actually perceive it now, but it sticks out, so they were firing down on them and across to them. And one last thing we will go check is, where did the artillery fire come from, hitting the positions of the 1st Regiment? It could only have come from that area, which we have not examined yet, and which is part of Mount Sammucro. But we'll be going there, and I'll show you how this sector was totally exposed to a big gun on that mountain. But we'll get there in a second. The veterans have often spoken, especially the veterans of the 1st Regiment, they have often spoken of fire taken below Monte La Defensa. And if you consider their position, the position of the 1st Regiment on the north side of the mountain, they could not take fire from the south because they were too deep in. They could not take fire from the west because those were the Allied positions. The only positions they could take fire from were this side where I am standing now, or that mountain, which is Mount Sammucro, 1,250 meters above sea level, and it comes down to a saddle where there are 720 meters above sea level. They came down that hill on Christmas Day, and it's a strange coincidence. They were fighting here, the Canadians were fighting here with the force on Christmas Day, and the Canadians with the Canadian infantry was fighting on the same day in Ortona. This is more or less the same line going across the Apennines. So I've always been curious about where some gun could have been to hit this area from that mountain. And we'll go check that out now. Ever since I had that plaque made, there's been something on my mind. To begin with, at a specific time of the day, if I am traveling down the highway, the sun hits it and I see the reflection of the plaque. But when I came up here the first times, I noticed something, and I kept asking questions, and no one could really give me a proper answer. So I'm going to take you there now. The first time I came up here, I noticed that there was some kind of a rectangular construction with a central passage, an opening right here where I am. And obviously the stones through the years, almost a century now, have all either fallen off on one side or come in another. And behind this huge position, this emplacement, there was another little wall. Now this is very typical of a piece of artillery, where there is one entrance, the piece of artillery, the cannon, whatever it is, and behind it the deposit for the ammunition. But nobody ever said anything about a cannon being up here. Nobody has ever seen any documentation, a photograph. No shepherd has ever spoken about a cannon being here. So, number one, in archaeology, if you find the foundation of a column, that base of the column will tell you more or less how big the column is, and according to how big the column is, how big the building is. So there are clues that will tell you things. Now here we have a piece of archaeology telling us that there was some strange temporary construction here, and it was on the side of the hill, not on the top. So I never managed to get some proper information from anybody. A lot of people said, no, it can't be because the shepherds have never spoken about it. Well, I think that when the Germans came up here, the shepherds went in the opposite direction. They weren't interested in what they were doing if they wanted to stay alive. In any case, I came up here with the general, commander of the Canadian Army, General Winnick, 4 years ago. And he had an adjutant with him, and we were here, and I asked the general, what would you say this is? I see a huge emplacement, but I don't know what could have been here. So he said, you're lucky, because today I have a gunner with me. So he called the gunner who was down there looking at some machine gun emplacements. He came up and he said, figure out what this is and where it's shooting. The gunner said, where were the Allies? They were that way. And what else was around here? This was all German, and there was only one direction in which you would have Allies. 1st Special Service Force, 3rd Division, British. He kept going back and forth for about a quarter of an hour. Then he finally came here and he said, okay, this is probably the emplacement for an 88mm gun, which was shooting on the north side of La Defensa. And I said, my God, could it reach it? Of course it could reach it. It would go that far. And observation on this hill beside us would tell them what the coordinates were and whether the shot had arrived, short, long, or right into the target. And I asked him, are you sure? He says, of course I'm sure. There is nothing else that could have been this big. It could have only shot in one direction because it wasn't interested in shooting on the German positions. And I said, but why would it be on the side? It's on the side of the hill because the gunner throws in the coordinates, but he does not elaborate the coordinates. The coordinates are given to him by the observer who is further up, maybe 1,000 meters above sea level. And the observer controls the shot. And the important thing of being on the side is when you shoot the cannon, if you had it right on top on the crest, your enemy would see the position of the cannon because there would be a flame coming out of the muzzle. This way, the flame comes out of the muzzle, but your enemy who is further down beyond this crest is not going to see where the shot came from. So, that was the theory, and the veterans often told me, the ones who were in the 1st Regiment, exposed on the lower part of the north side, they said we could hear the 88s coming in. We could hear the shots coming in. This is the only place those shots could have come from. So, now we know. So if there was a cannon up here, and if there was some kind of a cannon shooting towards the positions of the force, there are the positions of the force. On the left, in the lower part, the dogleg, where 1st Regiment was. All the north side is exposed. The force managed to take the north side at 4 or 5 in the morning, and they had to move from the rounder part, which is the top of La Defensa, to the lower part at the last peak. That's La Rimetania. So from here, the field was totally open. There were Germans only on this side, and the Allies were only there at that moment. Later, the Allies managed to come in and eventually take San Pietro, but that's another story. San Pietro is down below us. So from here, a good gun could easily hit the positions of the force on the north side. This is our last stop, the Commonwealth War Cemetery in Casino, where the deceased Canadians of the force are buried. It has become their home away from home. They are cared for and honored by the locals. Knowing the personal stories of some of these men and having had the pleasure to meet their families, they have become akin to me. Whether it's sitting down with Private Victor Inanen, who lied about his age when he was just over 15 and lost his life on Mount Mayo at 17, or with Sergeant Frank Harvey, who was fatally wounded on Mount Arcalone while attacking 3 German machine gun positions, or with Captain W.F. Perry, who got hit on Mount Mayo while going from one foxhole to the next to make sure his men were okay. The commanding officer of the 1st Battalion, 2nd Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Tom McWilliam, is in the 5th row, not far from these men, and he was killed by mortar fire while leading his battalion into battle on Mount La Defensa. I tend to stop by from time to time, and this site is always a source of inspiration in tranquility, which resets one's priorities. What still strikes me after all these years is that the short lifespan between a soldier and a battalion commander was hardly 10 years. They were so young. And this is echoed by the famous poem, For the Fallen, by Lawrence Binion. Quote, "They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. We will remember them, as the stars that are starry in the time of our darkness." End quote. Only what is forgotten dies. What is remembered continues to live on.